Today, what we're talking about is the importance of relationships in youth justice work. I'm Dr. Owen Daly from the REPPP Project, joined by my colleague Jackie Dewan, and two panel members that we have here as well are practitioners that were involved with us throughout the research, Linda Kieran and Mary Lawler, so the organisations they work for are there. So just to explain a bit about REPPP, for those that don't know, Research Evidence into Policy, Programmes and Practice is what it stands for. And what we do essentially is provide the research evidence for the Department of Justice to make better policy decisions around youth justice. Okay? So we've been in the University of Limerick for about 7 years, I think. So what I'm going to cover with you guys today, I'm going to talk a bit about the development of youth diversion projects in general, how we've got to the point that we're at today, and why we focus on relationships in the first place. I'm going to talk to you a bit about our review of the evidence, because that was, sorry, hold on, here we go, there. Review of the evidence. This was our first step on the ladder. We needed to do a review of international evidence to see what was out there in research terms around kind of how relationships work in youth justice. So really important first step for us. Next thing that we had to do was co-design a new relationship model, a new relationship guidance with 16 case study sites from around the country, 16 youth diversion projects that we engage in our research to help us do that. So about 60 plus staff are involved with us throughout about 3 years of research. Then I'm going to talk to you a bit about the soft outcomes. And specifically, this was a piece of research we did with the young people. So important that we involved the young people's voice in this as well. And we would have spoke to them about, rather than asking about the model, we asked them about things that have affected them regards the relationship. So how has the relationship affected them? And specifically, we asked them for changes in their social and emotional well-being, how things develop for them as a result of their relationships with youth justice workers over a period of time. It's a really important facet of the research we were looking at with the young people. Then I'm going to, so there we go, yeah, there we go. Jackie is going to talk to you then for the next while about the implementation study. So parallel to our action research project, we would have had an implementation study that was going on with the sites as well, the 16 sites. Jackie's going to talk about that. And then our panel are going to come in and we're going to talk about how the research affected the work really, I suppose how it affected your practice, what you thought of it, the good, the bad and the ugly maybe. All good? Great. So first things first, why did we look at youth diversion projects, or what the development of youth diversion projects and how important it is really? So first of all, this is an example of the evidence-informed journey of youth diversion projects over the last number of years. Okay, so I would have started as a staff member around here sometime about 2007, I think is when I took over a project in Limerick. But before that, in the year 2000, what had happened was these projects had already existed from the 90s. They were connected to the Garda Diversion Programme, and they were a tool of the Garda Diversion Programme to help young people stay away from crime and antisocial behaviour. So really important, there's 106 of these in the country at the moment. So back in 2000, and between that and 03 or 03, there was an evaluation report done, Bowden and Higgins, that established, I suppose that was the forerunner for these established guidelines that gave a structure to these youth diversion projects, that started to push the projects more towards general youth work into more crime diversion work, which is really, really important. In 08 and 09, a baseline analysis took place done by Professor Sean Redmond, the director of REPP, my boss, and he would have visited 96 of 100 projects to really see how offending and youth offending was happening in localities around the country. So I would have got a visit from Sean and I would have spoke to him about what was happening for young people in the community that I worked in. So from that, a number of profiles of offending came, and the baseline analysis, what it really did was it designed effective local responses to youth crime. That tagline. That was the idea of the baseline analysis. So we started to put evidence to the work at that point. So here in 2010, the use of pulse offence data to inform the analysis of local crime problems. Just to say this is a really important step here. Police data is very, very hard to access, a lot of confidentiality issues. So they were taking a giant leap here with us to try and share local crime data with the projects, to try and get projects to start gearing their work towards what was happening locally around the crime picture. So a really, really important step by the Gardaí. And then that led to the next step around risk assessment and how we were going to actually risk assess young people that came in the door of the projects. And this principle of R&R has been really, really important. So risk, need, responsivity. And it simply means that the higher the risk and the higher the need, the more you need to respond locally to that the trouble that young people are in, or whatever it might be. And we started using a tool called YLS-CMI, so Youth Level of Service Case Management Inventory, I think is what it stands for. And what that does is it allows you to map where the risks are for a young person and put a plan in place that will help that young person stay away from crime locally. So a really important step for us. I suppose around that time as well, the best practice development team came from a number of different projects that were involved in some trials of different tools that we were going to use. And I suppose some of them are sitting here today, and we're involved with them now in a research and development team nationally, which is really, really important. So, best practice development team, it expanded at that point. Members were made full-time after this. And I suppose the idea was to provide a suite of training around evidence-based tools that projects could do. Okay, so try to develop the work of the projects locally, really important work that the projects were doing. Things like even use of the YLS-CMI and how you would do that. So these specially trained best practice development team staff were training projects locally. Then in 2019, a number of us were hired to look at relationships and how relationships can affect behaviour, the criminal behaviour of young people, how important they are. And I suppose our idea was that we would co-design guidance for projects around how that might work in practice. So, why relationships in the first place? Why would we focus on relationships? First of all, I can tell you as a practitioner, I know they're really important to young people. Young people tell youth justice workers they're really important to them. So that's a really, really important starting point. The department and REPPP at the time, I think, were listening to people on the ground talk about their relationships and talk about how important they were. But even me as a practitioner, to be able to tell you what it is about a relationship that works with a young person, I probably wouldn't be able to nail it down. I'd probably say one or two things, but I wouldn't have a really good comprehensive knowledge of what I was doing that actually worked for young people. So it's really important that we saw this as a black box, okay? The practitioner wisdom that we were going to engage with this research was really important. So we knew there was transformative properties and qualities in these relationships, but we didn't know what the evidence was around them till now. We wanted to figure out how they worked with practitioners for us to come up with a model and guidance around how to do it. Anyway, 60% of youth justice workers' time. So based on a survey in 2018, we knew that about 60% of a youth justice worker's time was spent on face-to-face contact with young people or building relationships in one form or the other. So if you think about that from a budget perspective or a funding perspective, it's really important to get that right. If 60% of 20 million goes on relationship building and face-to-face contact, it's really important we know how that works and we can do it well. So, improve services and outcomes for young people. Obviously, the main aim of what we do in these projects are to improve the service and improve outcomes for young people. Really importantly, we want young people to stay away from crime or stay away from becoming further involved in criminality, which is really important. And again, we figured that if we know how this 60% works, that we're able to reduce crime locally. So this is why we focus on relationships in our project. Okay, so just to briefly talk about kind of what we know. So we kind of know the easy stuff. And for many young people, turning away from crime can be a natural consequence of growing up. So that's Lawrence Steinberg. So it's fairly well established theory around young people and crime. Okay, young people grow out of crime. Okay, they mature, different things happen. Their maturity, their psychosocial maturity happens. Their prefrontal cortex develops, and they grow out of crime. So that's for the vast majority of young people. But Terry Moffat and Steinberg did some very important research and very clear about this. Here on the right-hand side, you can see the dual taxonomy, or developmental life course taxonomy really is what it is. That the vast majority of young people will offend in their adolescence, okay, maybe 70% here, and they will grow out of it in their later years, 25, 30, you can see the curve drops significantly. And that you will have a small number that will be involved for the life course, that will stay involved in criminality for a long period of time. Okay? And this is a really similar curve that we have in Ireland. So in Ireland, about 18 or 19 offending peaks. So the most amount of young people are offending when they're that age. And then it tapers off for various reasons. It can even be something like a relationship themselves, an intimate relationship. They might find a partner that pulls them away from crime, or they might have a child or something like that. So we know from desistance theory and different criminological theories, lots of things that happen for young people to stay away. But there are certain young people, and a majority, I think, of young people involved in the diversion program that really need help, okay? So they need support, they need diversion, and the main element of diversion for us anyway is to try and keep young people away from the formal criminal justice system, which we know, if you get involved in it, can be criminogenic, can lead to more crime, okay? So our idea around diversion is to keep them away from that system. Research also suggests that mentoring in youth work, for example, has significant positive impacts on reduced involvement in crime. So really important that we know that youth work, and we know that kind of that relationship type work is really, really good at diverting young people from crime. So really important what we know already at starting point. A colleague of ours then, at the start of our project in, I suppose, 2019, 2020, maybe 2019, would have done a review of the international evidence. And that provided us with an evidence synthesis that describes particular features of effective professional relationships. So really important, there was things that were recognised within this report that were going to help us on our journey with the 16 sites. So I'll just give you a brief insight here. It suggests that the core skills involved in developing effective working relationships with young people include active listening, taking the time to get to know the young person, empathetic responding, advising, guiding, modelling pro-social behaviours, and challenging ideas and behaviours in a non-threatening or judgmental manner. So we know there are certain things that you can do from this report already that will work for young people to try and keep them away from crime, criminality. Now the handle is there. I'm sure this presentation will be available to people. You can read the whole report. It's available through the institutional repository. Okay. So, how did we go about developing a relationship model and guidance for youth diversion projects? Essential for our research was this idea of practice wisdom and bottom-up co-design with 16 case study sites. So we already, when we came into the position, we had 16 sites that were actually ready to go. People self-volunteered for this. They were really interested in this idea that relationships should be examined, okay? So we used a process called action research, and that is a systematic, collaborative approach where researchers and practitioners both conduct research and take action to simultaneously investigate and change an issue, or practice in this case, and do that in real time. So very important for us, we were using action research with 16 sites and 60 plus staff to achieve this. The question that we wanted to answer here was, what can youth justice practitioners do to build the kinds of effective relationships that are most likely to divert young people from crime? It's a pretty straightforward question. And again, just the graphic here shows that what we were essentially doing is involved in 16 sites where we could connect the dots between the practice, wisdom, what people knew, and combine that knowledge together for the first time. It was really, really important for us. So, our action research cycle, and I've been warned against using this because it's too much in there, okay? But just to say, I try and make it as easy as I possibly can. So when we came into our jobs, we had a researcher and a colleague of ours that was gathering and analysing the existing evidence for us. Okay, that was the Fullerton report. At the same time, we interviewed 24 of the staff that were involved with us in the research project, and they told us what they did that worked on the ground. So we were able to combine the knowledge from the international review and what we found out from the 24 interviews and build new knowledge together. So we would have come up with a way of pulling out the themes from both of those things and working through those with the practitioners in a workshop that was done in UL actually. So we were able to see what practitioners in Ireland were saying about what works. That moved us on to this stage. We then were able to kind of create ideas around how we might transfer those things that work into practice in Ireland, about what youth diversion projects do and how these things might look. We then co-designed a model and guidance around how you would do this in practice. Okay, so we started to put the pieces together for a model and guidance around how you would do this if you were in a project in Limerick, for example. Then we asked practitioners, when they were happy with what we had designed together, to try this out. We actually did 2 trials with them. After the first trial, lasted about 6 months, we took the information back, adapted the model, and went back to them again and asked them to retry it. Now, in the middle here, if I had a big red marker, I'd put it there because COVID hit us. And it was a really difficult time. We moved a lot of our workshops online, things we planned to do in person. We just did them online. So we survived. It wasn't ideal, but we survived. And this stage here then reflects, after the trial process, we obviously came back to the practitioners with what we had created, what we had done together, and presented it back to them. And there was tweaks to be done. There was things that needed to change. But eventually we came to a situation where we had, this new model and guidance that we were going to use with projects, or we were going to scale out to the rest of the projects. So that's the cycle. Within this reflection stage as well, this is kind of where we decided that we were going to engage with young people. But I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. So what we found, the relationship model itself, a lot of practitioners would refer to this as a relationship journey, okay? And don't worry, the model, I have another slide with the model on it if you can't see it there. Just to briefly explain, when we tried to put an analogy on this, when we tried to use kind of a paint analogy, so again, we had a base layer. So a layer that was really, really important as a foundation, okay? And this was to create a safe culture to build a relationship on. Safety being really important for young people. They needed a space to feel safe, and if they didn't have that space, they needed to at least feel safe in the relationship. They needed to feel like they were wanted and safe to engage with this person, which was really important starting point. The blue core layer here in the middle was around building trust, giving young people time in order for that trust to build, supporting young people and being young person centered. So that was like meeting a young person wherever they were at, at whatever stage, and trying to be consistent with whatever stage they were at and trying to be persistent with them even if they didn't want to meet you sometimes. So this idea, they are described as the essential elements of functioning positive relationships by the practitioners. This idea of time, trust, support, and taking the young person where they're at, that young person-centered approach. Okay, finally, there were 7 group skills, attributes, practices, we call them a number of different things, that can help build each unique relationship with a young person. So I kind of refer to them as practices mainly. This idea of being fully committed to the job, to the young person, being there for them, communicating with empathy with them, understanding them, okay? Making connections and advocating, very important as a connection piece within that role of a Garden Diversion Project, being a person or role model that can help them out to get things achieved for themselves. Being flexible with them, because these young people don't have diaries. They're not going to turn up at 12 o'clock in the morning sometimes because they're only getting up out of bed. So you need to be really, really flexible in that sense. And that's the difference, I suppose, around this youth justice work that we found with other pieces of work that we looked at. So practice use of self and reflection. Really important that staff members and practitioners like we have here can reflect on themselves and what they're doing and use themselves sometimes, give a bit of themselves, talk about their hobbies, their pastimes, create connections. Really, really important stuff. Be honest and challenge constructively. Again, this idea of challenging, maybe that takes a bit of time to be able to challenge a young person, but being honest in what you do has been really important and not trying to be someone else. Guiding, inspiring hope and building agency for young people, because I suppose a lot of practitioners would have taught us that young people didn't feel like they even had the ability to make decisions for themselves, and it's really important that we try and build that up in young people. Okay, so just to give you a sense of some of the quotes that came from our evidence and from our report. So obviously around the base layer, the safe space grows as the relationship grows, something that someone would have said. Around the core layer, relationship building is the cornerstone of our work with young people, and the time it takes depends on the individuals. Okay? And then just around kind of challenging people here and being honest. Our approach to challenge negative behaviours is different to the approach others in authority might take. We are honest and try to challenge in a safe way when the time is right. This is evidence that we would have got from practitioners over the trial process or the action research process. So, getting back to our question 2, the stage 4 that we were talking about a while ago, that reflection stage. We knew we needed to engage with young people and we wanted to engage with young people. We didn't know exactly how. My experience of this, sometimes engage with young people can be very tokenistic. Can ask the people that are always asked the same questions and they give you the same answers. So we decided to do something slightly different and we took a chance on this. We supported the youth justice workers to collect the data. We asked them to talk to the young people that they had relationships with and tell us what was changing for them as a result of these relationships. Very difficult thing maybe to comprehend, but we figured that if we did this in a really informal way with youth justice workers that had a trust relationship with young people, we'd get better data and better information. So that was a chance we took. What we were trying to answer here was, how can effective relationships with youth justice practitioners help divert young people from crime? Okay, so what that resulted in, trying to answer that question, 27 young people in total were involved from 11 of the 16 sites. And we call these conversations with young people. We can call them interviews. We just left it open. We asked youth justice workers, now some people like Linda did focus groups, which is better for us. So it was the technique that they wanted to choose that was qualitative in nature. So there was focus groups, I think. There was some interviews, there were some informal conversations, like a walk and talk, where young people were telling them about these things. And we asked the youth justice workers then to feed us back that information as best they could. Sometimes it was transcription, sometimes it was written down on a sheet that we would have given them, a feedback sheet. So we just used the trust relationship and prioritised that over anything else. What we ended up with was 6 key social and emotional changes, or soft outcomes as we call them, that young people described. And we call them soft outcomes because we figured that, if you put these things in place, they can potentially lead to harder outcomes like crime diversion or maybe getting back into school or something like that. Okay, so these soft outcomes, personal and social development things, have been really, really important. So, start here, more trusting. Young people would have told youth justice workers that they felt they were more trusting in other people. They didn't trust anyone in authority before, but suddenly they began to trust. And it's really, really important. Increased optimism and possibility. I felt like because of their relationship, they now believed in themselves a bit more. They believed in things they could do because they were being subjected to things they mightn't have got before. They were being brought places, they were doing things that they mightn't have done. Better at navigating their own relationships, really important. With their family, they felt like their relationships improved. Things were going better for them, which is really, really important. And even things like being able to navigate away from bad relationships, which is, again, really important. We're talking about criminological research. Peer has been really, really important. Improve coping skills and improve decision-making and maturity. I think these are, for me, two of the most important things. Because when we look at all the evidence around young people offend, you think it's decision-making, it's impulsivity. It's these things that sometimes relate to your ability to make good decisions. So if they turn around and tell us that because of their relationships, they felt like they could make better decisions and they had better coping skills, I immediately think that's going to help them to reduce the crime they're involved in. Okay? Improve self-worth and confidence. Obviously really important to have self-worth in general. Now, there's obviously mixed evidence about how confidence can affect. You could be a really confident offender, right? But I think being able to say that young people's confidence increased as a result of a relationship is a really, really positive thing. So, why are these findings important? Apart from the fact that we can now look at those soft outcomes and say if these things are happening, young people, if they have better coping skills, that directly relates to stopping them or diverting them from crime, which is really important. We also know that the youth justice workers are really good at their job anyway. They're really, really good. They do a really, really good job. Recent evaluation proves that. It's a really, really good piece of work, and the workers are really, really skilled in what they do. But if you look at someone like Katie McCabe, right, professional football player, Ireland captain, she doesn't just go out and do it with no help or support along the way. Katie is subjected to a lot of science. She has a nutritionist. She probably has all these stats that appear after a match about what she did and what she didn't do. So what we're going to try and do here with our model when we scale this out to the 106 projects is provide that science that will make the projects and the workers on the ground better. That will help them to perform better, if that makes sense. Because they're already performing really well. Just keep that in mind. Okay, and then the last thing, which is the most important thing, I suppose, and we know this from our soft outcomes as well as the model itself. This is the tired-looking youth justice worker here, unfortunately. What he wants to achieve and what that youth justice worker wants to achieve is less offending and more pro-social behaviour. Okay? A young person might describe that as less bad stuff and more good stuff. Okay? And we now know from our research that relationship can encourage this to happen. Cool. Okay, I'll leave you with this, and it's over to Jackie. I think I'm pretty much on time. This is hopefully our report is going to be out later on this year. Final stages of review. So keep an eye out for it, please. And yeah, over to you, Jackie. Thanks.
Thanks, man. I have no idea on time because I don't have a watch, but yeah, we're good, are we? Okay, great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm going to speak to you today about the implementation study that was embedded as part of the Action Research Project. Okay, I'm just going to recap really quickly on what we set out to do, and Owen has described the first two parts of this really well already. So the first thing we wanted to do was we wanted to demonstrate the contribution of effective professional relationships, and we did that piece in conjunction with the practitioners who spoke to young people on the ground, asked them, well, you know, what do you attribute to the relationship? What has the relationship done for you? And those were really, really powerful stories from some young people around the effect it had on their life, which was so, so important. And that central role of the youth justice worker as being that one good adult, it was really, you know, moving data actually to go through and to try to even kind of arrive at those themes that Owen spoke about. So that was the first thing. Another thing we did was we worked with the practitioners, and this was really kind of the central brief, I think, when we started the Action Research Project, was to co-design guidance for youth justice workers on effective relationships. Really kind of challenging thing to do. As Owen described already, youth justice workers are really good at what they do. They already work really effectively with young people, and sometimes that knowledge is lost because it's very hard to describe, and it's very hard for the policymaker sometimes maybe to understand that actually this investment of time is, you know, really, really fundamental to what we do. So we worked with the youth justice workers to co-design, try and implement this model. So that was the second thing. A third thing we did, which is what I'm going to speak to you about now, is embedded local implementation studies into the process. So as we were going through the cycle of action research, we wanted to know how that was landing for people. What were people able to engage with the relationship model and what did that look like. So that was kind of a fundamental part of the process as well, but it was kind of being done kind of as, you know, in parallel with the other stuff that was happening along the way as we went through the study. So how did we set this up, or how did it come about? Well, we were very fortunate to start with because the policymaker, the Department of Justice in this case, already had a well-established relationship with the organisations who manage these projects. Primarily they're managed by voluntary youth work organisations, community-based organisations, and there was a good working relationship there that existed already. Owen has already described the process that those youth justice projects came through over a series of years, and so the engagement was quite strong, and you know, people knew each other quite well. So the Department of Justice agreed to, or offered even, to provide sponsorship or bursaries to one practitioner from each of the 16 participating sites. So you'll probably see Mary there on the slide, who was one of our first graduates from the programme, and Linda's involved with the programme as well. So it was a really, really good offer that has continued actually over the last number of years, and we've been very fortunate with that arrangement. But in the first year of the process, there were 16 bursaries offered. Not every site was able to take up on the offer, but that was okay. We still worked with that, and I'll speak to you about that. But essentially it was an offer for the practitioners to be involved in an MA, an online MA in Human Rights and Criminal Justice here at the University of Limerick through the School of Law. We had 12 of the 16 sites who took up on the offer, and the other sites for various reasons weren't in a position to do that. But that was okay because everyone from each of the participating sites still agreed to engage in the implementation study with us regardless. And what we had for a finish were 14 local implementation studies conducted by the practitioners. And the kind of mutually beneficial arrangement here was that those studies would give us a very good sense around the progress and how it was going, but it would also form the basis of the dissertations for that first cohort coming through the MA programme. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial arrangement. We were all going to work together, but a unique arrangement as well in that all of the MA students were going to focus their study on an implementation piece, if you like. So Owen mentioned the three researchers, Owen, Caitlin and I, and we developed, I suppose, close working relationships then with 5 or 6 project sites each. So Owen had 6 projects and Caitlin and I worked with 5 projects. And as part of that then we engaged with the practitioners who were nominated from those sites to engage with those implementation studies. There were also kind of regular governance checks built into this as well. We had to be going back to the advisory committee on a fairly regular basis, and to the Department of Justice, who are part of that committee anyway, just to let them know how things were going in terms of the MA offer, the programme, and implementation on the ground as well. What was the impact of the Action Research Project? How was it going? So that was kind of built into the process. So what did we set out to do in terms of these implementation studies? What was the point of them, I guess? So what we really wanted to do was just chart the implementation progress and how it was being experienced by practitioners on the ground. You know, what was the effect or the impact of being involved in the research and using the new relationship guidance. And remember, they were kind of developing it or creating it as they were trialling it as well. So it was kind of a unique enough situation to be kind of feeding back to us routinely on how that was all going. We had 14 case study accounts of implementation from the practitioners who were involved in the MA programme, and we had 2 other MA students who were doing kind of separate studies because they weren't directly involved in projects. One of those students was from the Department of Justice actually, and the other student was a member of what was then the best practice development team. So they carried out or conducted separate studies which fed into an overall study to give us a really good sense of implementation. So what we did, well, we asked the practitioners to engage with us in the process of data gathering, really, to meet with us fortnightly over 10 months to gather real-time data. What I mean by that is that those check-ins talked about anything that had occurred over the last 2 weeks, really. So we were getting a really good sense of, I suppose, key events or moments along the way that might have impacted implementation. We recorded all of those interviews using video software, and we managed that internally, so we stored that on a secure database within REPP to be shared out to the practitioners at a later stage when they were ready to go into the kind of coding and analysis stage. The researchers facilitated the conversations with the practitioners, so it was a one-on-one interview with the practitioners, structured around 5 routine questions. And the questions asked practitioners to talk about trust firstly. We had a Likert scale for the trust and workload for the first 2 questions, and we asked practitioners, tell us, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much trust do you feel in the process at the moment, in terms of what's going on? And secondly, how do you rate the workload? How is it impacting on you? So we were very cautious from the start that we didn't want to impact on frontline work that practitioners were doing with young people. So we wanted to keep within a certain workload balance. And we had agreed with practitioners that around 5% of their weekly time could go towards the Action Research Project, and that we tried to stay within that ask. Sometimes on certain months there were other events maybe that pulled practitioners for longer than that, and then we tried to balance it out over the other times. And then the other 3 questions just focused on, tell us about what's been going really well since we last spoke, what hasn't been going so well, and was there anything unexpected or unanticipated. Owen mentioned the COVID scenario. You can imagine that a lot of things came up around that over the time, but that was okay too, because it was really insightful for us to know how these things were affecting people and how we maybe needed to change tack sometimes along the way, which we did do during the COVID period. We changed these questions a little bit just to reflect the kind of supports that projects needed. So we just asked them very general questions around, is there anything we can do at the moment, how's it all going? And we reverted back to the questions again when things kind of settled down a little bit. Remember that we moved online, as Owen said, for a lot of the process through the COVID period, and that was challenging for projects as well, because they had to adapt to our adaptive plans and things that we didn't anticipate were going to happen. So what did we end up with? Well, we ended up with 170 recorded interviews across from all the practitioners. Most of the interviews were in and around, well, they were supposed to start out at being kind of a 15-minute, fortnightly check-in, but a lot of the time the conversation went on for longer than that. So oftentimes 30 minutes, sometimes we had conversations for an hour. That was okay too. And approximately 3,500 minutes of data for the practitioners then to sift through. So what we did was we supported the practitioners to use a consistent methodology. So we brought them through the process of a thematic analysis, and we provided a kind of a guidance book, if you like, and we also workshopped with the practitioners on 2 occasions to support them to actually code and analyse the data and have a consistent format to do that. We had looked at the ethics side of things for the students as well, and that was all taken care of, but the students themselves were responsible for coding and analysing their own data. And they fed that data back to us then, or they fed the information back to the research team. Some of the things we found from this process, or what did this process do, I suppose, what was the point of it? Well, firstly, I suppose we know from this data that we got really, really good insights around the kind of experience. So we were able to kind of get a sense of where mood and motivation was at different time points. And again, that informed us around, we need to change tact here a little, or we need to communicate a bit more, or we need to be more engaged, or we need to bring the practitioners together a bit more, things like that. So we were kind of getting a heads up around some of that stuff. The real-time data was a very effective way to track the progress, just to see, how's it going, is it moving along, and keep people kind of engaged as well with it. And also to identify any kind of key time points or activities that we did that were quite successful or not, and how they landed with people. So getting a kind of a sense of that from people just from those conversations as well. And really we got some critical messages from practitioners on the ground along the way as well around things that were happening. Again, remembering the COVID kind of period, there was certain things that we needed to pull back on, or we needed to support along the way for certain practitioners, and it gave us a good sense of that in kind of a real-time way. Some things we kind of found, or that became evident to us when we heard the information and when we had those interviews and had those conversations with practitioners, the kind of central role, the integral role of relationships in their work. So in using the guidance, practitioners spoke about it being part of their everyday practice anyway, so it was really, really well received. It was integral to what they did, and people really kind of bought into it and believed in it. We found out a bit about the conditions for relationship building, what are those conditions that support it, and that kind of informed obviously some of the guidance work as well, and bringing together the kind of reflections from practitioners to develop that guidance that was co-designed with them. So those kind of things we found out. We found out a bit about organisational support, and what was it about the organisation that maybe helped practitioners on the ground, and what didn't help as well. We found out things around time and space, practitioners needing that space and time to talk about relationships, to work with their teams, to have peer discussions. These are things that were becoming obvious to us as we spoke with practitioners throughout the process. The kind of whole notion of reflective practice as well, because they were engaging in these conversations, they were having an opportunity to reflect on how things were going and having new learning opportunities in talking as well about the practice. We learned a lot about the unanticipated events and what kind of things can happen that throw things way off tack, and particularly for youth justice workers who at any moment have to respond to various kind of crises that's happening in a young person's life, and how they respond to that, and how things have to change. The use of knowledge and experience to reflect and enhance existing good practice. So, practitioners have really good wisdom around what works on the ground with young people already, and how they put that into practice in their everyday work is really, really important. We also discovered that, from the majority of practitioners who were engaged in this process, they didn't feel like implementing the new guidance impacted in any way on the work that they were already doing or on their frontline work. In fact, they reported that it improved, if anything, what they already did. So that was really, really useful. And we also discovered that there's potential spillover. So, practitioners spoke about the value of relationships, and they've talked to us a lot over the time about this. And we now know that some of these findings could be translated into other human service settings where they would all equally be beneficial. So to kind of just recap on some of the things we know now. So Owen has spoken to you about the first piece around the young people. We now know how they affect young people to a degree, and I think there's more work to be done on this, and REPP is engaged in looking further at the kind of outcomes for young people. But we know that they do these relationships positively affect young people's personal, social and emotional outcomes. And the findings suggest that these can promote changes in offending behaviours and attitudes. We now have a co-designed, evidence-informed model to guide effective relationship practice. It's informed by evidence from the international review and from local knowledge from practitioners here in Ireland. And we now have something that we can say, speaks to the relationship work in these settings. And we know something about what supports practitioners in implementing these effective relationships on the ground. There is kind of a further study being conducted that's interrogating the implementation data through an implementation science lens to discover, well, what was it about the relationship piece or the co-creation of this relationship guidance that supported practitioners to accept the model, to adopt it, and to implement it on the ground throughout this process. So we have more work and more study coming from that particular piece as well, because there's a really rich database there from practitioners' experiences of implementing this piece. Some of the recommendations that came from this, we had 5 kind of core recommendations that came out of the Action Research Project. The first was that, from the practitioner's perspective, the model worked well and should be disseminated and rolled out across the 106 projects nationwide, and the Department of Justice have agreed to this as well, and have thought that this would be something that they would desire. Time and space for reflection on relationship work was really, really important to practitioners, and that time and space needs to be considered in a structured way around how that can be developed over time to provide that for practitioners on the ground. Organisational support and how we might support organisations to provide the right type of support for their staff on the ground to implement these effective relationships. The Department of Justice needs to support that aspect as well, and there is some work underway looking at maybe things like management support to support supervision, for example, or to look at competency frameworks for staff, stuff like that that's kind of happening in tandem as well with some of these things. And the kind of need for ongoing learning and development around this piece of work, because relationships aren't static, They are unique to every single young person, and every relationship is different, and we need to continually be looking at that and developing it, you know. And people spoke about things that need to happen as well, in terms of looking at young people who find it harder to engage with these particular projects, and how we can adapt things maybe to make sure that they are also included. What we did with these findings, we did bring back to the governance group, if you like, the advisory committee, to say, you know, here's what we did, here's what we found, here's what we recommend. And we asked them to tell us, you know, what of these recommendations are desirable to you and what is feasible. And we did the same with a group of practitioners at the very last workshop that we conducted, to say to them, do you think these are realistic things that should happen on the ground? Implementation decisions are now going to happen in terms of that, and how that's going to be rolled out or scaled out across the country. We've looked at 4 potential areas for that. The first is around disseminating and educating people around the guidance, because I don't know if any of you attended the talk yesterday, and it was really, really insightful around, you know, the importance of alignment, but also awareness of the kind of mission, you know. So if we're bringing this guidance out to projects across the country, they need to have a good sense of where did it come from, what's it all about, and why. So those dissemination events are actually kick-starting next Thursday, I believe, so and will be happening across the country between now and October, with all of the 106 projects around the country. The next thing is developing mastery. So we already have practitioners involved in what we're calling the mastery group, to look at that continuous development piece with us, and to, you know, inform us and contribute to kind of plans going forward around supporting projects to implement the relationship guidance on the ground. There's going to be a lot of facilitating and collaborating with projects over time. We feel like the guidance should be just that, a guidance, but it's not a specific prescriptive manual around here's what you must do. It's more so saying that these things are really fundamental to relationships. Here's some ways that practitioners who are involved in the Action Research Project have done it. They found this has worked well for them, and it really gives a sense for projects of things that they could do differently, or things they could try for individual young people along the way. And supporting organisations is really key as well. So over time, we hope that the department will work with us around, you know, new ways that projects and organisations rather can be supported to just give extra hand to the projects on the ground around what they need to make sure that these relationships can happen in the most effective way. So that's it from me. Thanks for listening. I have no idea on my time. I'm sorry, I forgot to bring up my watch. So I'm going to hand you back to Owen, who's going to facilitate some questions with our panel. Thanks a million.
Am I okay to go with the mic here? We're good? Getting the thumbs up from Dylan. Great. Jackie, it's always good when you're under. This is the best thing. So I was going to keep the questions till after we have our panel discussion, but if anyone had a burning question they want to ask now, in case people might want to tip off early, is it okay to do that, Helen? Yeah, do you want to ask a question? Do we need a mic? Is that okay? Yeah, it's just for the recording. And then we'll kick off. Yeah,
cool. Firstly, thank you for a great presentation. You both presented very clearly, and since I became involved in REPP, I've heard about this project a lot, but it was good to just get the full story from start to finish in a very accessible way, so thank you. My question kind of relates to, now that you're at the end of a certain research journey, and I suppose I'd like to get your advice and pick your brains in terms of, as I'm about, and some of my colleagues here are about to start into another big research project that involves working with community and statutory organisations. Community-based organisations were a key partner in your study from the very start. Is there any advice or learning you got from, at the beginning, getting them involved in the research project?
Yeah, do you want me to?
Yeah. You go first, and then go on.
Sorry, I thought you were.
Go on.
Yeah, Helen, that's a really, really good question. I think probably what was really, really important was that the department worked with REPP at the time to kind of put the invite out there. So projects were invited to participate, but also some projects I think were selected or were purposely kind of contacted because they had shown kind of real interest in the area or being involved in these type of initiatives previously. And I think it was important to work to an extent with practitioners who were really invested in the idea and really had a good grasp of what it was about, who'd spoken about it in the past, spoken about the value of it, you know, because they were really just on board and bought into it with us from the get-go. And I think that was part of the process, if I understand correctly. It was pre us being involved, actually, that projects had been selected by that point. But that's my understanding of it. Would that be right, Owen?
Yeah. And I suppose the report even says this, like, they were willing participants, you know, like we didn't exactly sample randomly and go and ask people to be involved. They wanted to be involved, really helped us. And I suppose a key part of what we did with them was at the start of this, we agreed a workload that they would put towards the project with us. So we were going to do about 95% of the heavy lifting behind the scenes when they would give us 5% of their weekly workload. That's what we asked them to do. So that contract or workload agreement that we had with all the projects was really important. Now, some days you probably went over that, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think just the co-design piece as well, that's really important in that, and that we kind of always felt part of something that was evolving rather than kind of, you know, I suppose it was always done with us rather than to us, if you know what I mean. Yeah. We never kind of felt that imposition. It was a very easy sell, So it depends what you're selling, Ellen.
Yeah. It's true though, like, and I suppose we changed our language from co-production to co-design because, you know, I suppose we didn't have the young people designing the product with us. Do you get me, if you want to call it a product? So it was more so that we were designing something for the service user, do you know what I mean? So it was slightly different language. But I suppose the inclusiveness and the not taking liberties with their time and stuff like that were really effective for us, Helen. So if that gives you anything to go on, like, it helps if people are interested, would be my bit of advice, you know. Let's try and make it exciting. You know, I think we had good fun along the way as well. So that helps. And we built good relationships. As Jackie said, we had 6 projects each almost. You know, I had 6, I think, 5 and 5, whatever it was. But like it's essentially 5 years of work. You know, we built really good relationships with them. They're here today for us. Some of them, you know what I mean? And we still stay in contact with people. So I think that was really helpful, that relationship piece. And I suppose we believe in the work too, Jackie. You know, we've come from youth diversion projects, and that helped us with that piece as well. Cool. Hope
Thank you.
it's all right. I might get to the panel. Like, if anyone has a burning question, they need to leave later, you could ask now. But otherwise, I might just go to the panel if that's all right. Is that okay? Perfect. Okay, I'll keep the mic. Okay, so straightforward enough. Linda, would you mind telling the audience here about your experience, you know, your background in youth justice?
Yeah, thanks, Owen. I don't bore people. I'm very conscious. I'm involved for 28 years in youth work. Yeah, Jesus. Like, I suppose youth justice, the last 10. So I've kind of come from a background of youth information, community youth work, mentoring, at kind of face-to-face work to management work. So, years of experience, I suppose. Moved into youth justice in 2014, I think. Yeah. Spent 2 years working on the ground in youth justice face-to-face with young people. And then I moved into the coordinator role for the project in Kerry, which is a divisional model. So there's a team of 13 youth justice workers in the project. Never looked back, really. I mean, it's great work. I really believe in the work. I believe in that whole relationship aspect. It's fundamental to it working. I suppose within that role then I did, I suppose it kind of motivated me. I really kind of see the link between justice and welfare. I suppose that's kind of one of my own kind of interests. And that kind of motivated me to do a LLM in 2015 and kind of focused my dissertation around kind of welfare and justice and that. And then I went on and did the Masters with yourselves, and that was a brilliant course. It's been a journey, and it's been a great journey.
Brilliant. And I think I probably met you in 2014, around that time anyway.
Yeah, I think so,
So it's great to have
been
you
around a while.
Yeah.
Too long.
And you look, 28 years, I didn't think it
was...
Jesus. Afraid to ask that.
I know I don't look it.
Mary, go on. Can you beat that?
I'm nearly afraid to say how long I've been around.
Yeah.
But I suppose suffice to say I've been around a long time as well, maybe over 20 years in youth justice. I actually have spent my entire working life to date working with young people in the 12 to 18 age group. I started out my career as a secondary school teacher for a few years. And then I got a job with Feroiga working as a regional youth officer in Dublin, but I was still working with young people and volunteers. And then in 2000, I moved to Tala where it was actually the start of a youth diversion project, was starting there, and I have literally been there since. So I've been working directly with young people for that length of time. I think kind of over those years, it's just when you put up the graphic there, Owen, of kind of going back to 2000, I've actually been involved in quite a lot of the trials that have taken place sort of over the years. So kind of going back to 2009, so we've been very much part of introducing kind of the screening version, which is a risk assessment for young people coming into youth diversion projects. And you mentioned the YLS, a risk assessment tool that's now standardised and used right across the whole YDP network. And then more recently, I suppose my involvement with the Action Research Project. I think when you've been in a job sort of as long as I have, sometimes when opportunities come up to reflect on what you're doing, because you can go a little bit on autopilot when you've been around for a long time, and to get that opportunity to sort of shake yourself up, dust yourself off and say, right, maybe there are things I could be doing better. So when the opportunity came to take part in the Action Research Project, we were delighted. I can't remember whether we were selected or whether we volunteered, but it was a bit of both. And then I suppose the real carrot was as well the opportunity to do the Masters in Human Rights and Criminal Justice. So.
Brilliant. Amira, I might stick with you and then go back to, because it makes more sense this way. Can you tell me a bit about then relationships in your work? So you're secondary school teacher, youth justice. How do you use it?
Yeah, so I suppose like the relationship really is central to the work. It's part of my daily routine. If I was actually to pick apart my week, it's probably there's over 20 hours in my week that is actually directly working with young people. So that's either kind of working with young people on a one-to-one basis or working with young people in small groups. So it would normally be maybe young people of about 4 or 5 in a group, just because of the nature of even what we're trying to do. So it's an integral part, and the relationship, if you don't have the relationship, you can't do the work. It's as simple as that. And it really starts from the first time you meet a young person. It's even how, on that very first meeting, how you interact with that young person is important. Because the young person has to feel they're welcome, they're greeted, the way they're treated with respect. So it kind of starts from that, and then you build on it. And I suppose the better the relationship, the better chances you have of putting kind of opportunities young person's way, the more likely they are to listen to you, take advice, really feel that this person has my best interest at heart. So therefore, I'm going to take that chance. I'm going to take that opportunity. So it really is. I can't even stress just how important it is. It's literally, it's kind of how you meet and greet them every day, and every interaction is important.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a proper practice wisdom there for sure. And then it's slightly different maybe in your project because it's a slightly different model in Kerry, right?
Yeah, it's the divisional model in Kerry. So there's 13 youth justice workers based around the county, and then I'm the coordinator, so I manage the workers. I suppose in terms of the relationships, I've always known youth work is about relationships. That's really important to how you succeed in the work. So I suppose that was always front and centre for me in engaging with staff and the team and supporting them to be able to do that work. And I think that's really, really important that you're, you know, as a line manager, that you're conscious that the time needs to go into developing those relationships. And it's not about focusing on, well, why isn't he doing this and why hasn't he done that? You know, it's about really kind of valuing that piece of work. So kind of going back to earlier what we were saying about coming on board with the relationship, it was a really easy sell to my team for that reason, because they really value the relationships with young people. And I suppose other agencies may not as much see that that's a catalyst really for mobilising young people to access the things in life they should access to have better outcomes. So I suppose my role is really supporting them to have good relationships. I need to model good relationships with them for them to be able to do that.
Perfect. And you were a youth justice worker as well, or you
I was a justice worker,
so it helps. And then I suppose because it's a slightly different model, even to stick with yourself for a minute, could you tell me a bit about then how you were involved in the research with that model that you managed? Like, how did it work for you? What was it like?
I suppose with kind of 2 tracks going, like Donald was doing the MA and he was involved in the research from that perspective, and then I suppose I was looking at it from kind of a line manager's perspective. So I looked at it in the context of support structures within the team and how I could support them to have better relationships with young people, and how I could use the themes that came out of the research to examine those relationships. So for me as a tool, as a line manager, it was actually really, really good because it gave me a framework to have discussions with workers around cases. And as part of the research, we focused on the higher risk young people for part of the research in the context of line management, and kind of measured relationships across those themes during line management sessions. So that was really, really useful. And I still would use that. I would still use that to help workers to contextualize complex relationships. Because I think they're probably the biggest challenge for workers, because you might have a situation where young people aren't showing up. And workers take that personally after a while. It's like, well, why aren't they showing up for me? Well, it's not about you.
Should I stop? Like,
So it's about kind of that continuous support, because it is a hard job for workers, and there are young people out there with very complex needs. So it's really important.
Cool. That's great. And Mary, even the same question, like your involvement and what was it like in the research might be slightly different from Linda's experience.
Yeah, I suppose ours was kind of slightly different in that, you know, we were actually directly involved in it as a practitioner. So I suppose maybe from the outset, and it goes back to a little bit about the buy-in. I mean, we were very invested from the get-go that this was about relationships. We could kind of really see that this is going to be central to our work. And it was something that we really wanted to kind of focus on. So I think kind of the way the whole process was structured as well really, really helped. And I mean, you mentioned earlier on, Owen, about the trust and the workload. So the workload, I suppose the ask on us at the beginning was sort of, it would be 5%. And, you know, we did try and stick to that. I know there were times probably it did go a little bit more. But I think that, you know, where 95% of the work was been done by the rep team, like it was really, that was kind of a no-brainer really in some ways, in terms of like, this is going to be the bulk of the work, and that what is the ask of us. So I think the ask was very reasonable, and it was something that we really wanted to kind of buy into. So from that point of view, it was good. I think in terms of, so it was myself and my colleague at the time, the two of us actually took part in it. And I think for us, kind of as a team, like we kind of very much saw we're kind of in this together as a team. We actually have we had a family support worker in our project at the time as well. So, you know, it kind of really involved us sort of sitting down ourselves and just taking time out, which is something sometimes you don't really do when you're in our line of work. You're constantly on the hoof going from one thing to the next. So this was just a kind of a time to sort of say, right, we need to take a bit of time out, sit down, reflect on what we're doing, and look at kind of what's actually happening here in terms of the relationship.
Brilliant, Mary. And like, people are going to think I paid you now to say this. So I did say as well the bad and the ugly as well, if there was anything as well that we could improve on. Yeah,
I suppose, well, look, at the bad at the time, I suppose, really was COVID, because it kind of changed everything. It changed, you know, our work is very much face-to-face. We need to have the young person sitting in front of us, like ringing them on the phone. You might as well be ringing. You could make 10 attempts before even if they answer the phone. So the face-to-face part of our work is really what's important. We need that young person in the space that we're in. So that was very challenging when we didn't have that, and we had to kind of look at other ways of trying to engage young people, which was very difficult. Ours weren't so great online either, you know, the phone's not working, they've no internet, you know, and generally that was the case. So it was difficult, it was challenging, and we did have to come up with new ways. So one of the things that we did that we wouldn't normally do in our work was outreach. So myself and my colleague, we used to put on the high-vis vests and we'd go walkabout. And it actually proved to be really, really good, because it kind of meant you were interacting with people on the street, you were meeting people. I was meeting people from years ago. I'm that long in the community, and they were saying, "Oh, Jesus, Mary, you're still around." So I said, "Yeah, I am." But so that was kind of, I suppose, it definitely was difficult, the COVID. I think the ugly bit of it was more to do kind of with the masters. I had to listen to myself for over 400 minutes of recording and transcribe it all. And I'll tell you now, that was challenging. That. So that was probably the worst bit of it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for your honesty. That's excellent. And Linda, I suppose the same applies, things that were challenging.
Yeah, I think the COVID was probably the challenging bit. I don't think there was anything about the researcher engaging with yourselves that was, difficult, to be honest. So no, overall, very positive, but the usual challenges of COVID.
And workload, I suppose, as well.
Yeah, workload was fine. I think the relationship piece is so important. And for years I've been listening to workers kind of saying they don't understand what we do about other agencies and not seeing that as kind of a professional approach to working with young people. So this was music to their ears, really. So it never was a challenge in terms of engaging with workers around the research. And
I'll stick with you for the next one as well. I suppose if you were to talk about now how the research might have affected your current practice, like, is there anything you could say about that?
I suppose the one thing just in relation to line management, it would be looking at, I suppose, having discussions around relationships within that kind of a framework. And also it provides kind of a structure for discussing those complex relationships. And I think that's a huge support for staff, because I think that's one area you kind of can't see the wood from the trees sometimes. There's so much complexity. So it's been really good in that regard. And I know from the youth justice workers themselves, we have a peer support network, which is the team divided into 3 different kind of peer support groups. And the focus of that, and really it was part of the research, we kind of set that up, is looking at individual cases and what the relationship looks like, what are the challenges in those cases, and I suppose getting information from each other and their peers, and bringing in things like the relationship window. I know that's a restorative tool, but it's kind of using that space to reflect on cases and discuss with their own peers and share knowledge. Cool. So I think that they're kind of the two main things, really.
They're really important things that will help the dissemination of this. Like figuring out how it works in projects for our own study that's going to happen. It's really important around what it looks like. So really good. We'll come back to you on that one. Okay. And I suppose even Mary, the same for yourself. Like your current practice, has the model changed things for you? Like the guidance itself is there any examples?
Yeah, I suppose kind of what the most important thing that it has done is really, personally first, I suppose kind of to be more reflective in my work. So that's really about kind of thinking about what you're doing, because again, as I say, when you're in it a long time, sometimes you can be a bit on autopilot. So I think it is important to kind of just think about, personally, I found anyway, to just sort of that reflective practice and be a bit more mindful in my interactions with young people, and, just having kind of more purposeful meetings and conversations so that I'm kind of more aware of the impact of what I'm doing and how I'm reacting with a young person and the impact it's having on them. So that's personally. I think from a team point of view, as a team, when we were in it together, because, it's very much our teamwork, our line of work. And it was really important that we would take that time out as well as a team to sit down, reflect, discuss, chat. Maybe we would look at people who haven't been like that, maybe showing up, or we haven't seen them for a while. What needs to be done? Who has tried what? Have we been at the house? Have we checked in? Have we? So it's about kind of just setting aside some space to just focus on that, just to focus on the relationship, because as I say, you can get caught up in doing the day-to-day jobs and not kind of focusing on maybe what's really important. So I think that was from a team point of view. And then I think it's important then as well, sort of from a management point of view, that line managers and managers know kind of what we're actually trying to do. That this sort of taking time out and space to reflect is very valuable time, and it's time well spent. So it's not like, we're not just sitting having a cup of tea, having a meaningless conversation. It's actually really important. So it's kind of, I suppose, to build that in, and for managers to be aware of that this is something that's really important and it's worth doing, because it can make the difference of a successful engagement of a young person or not.
It's really important advice.
So
it's excellent.
That's kind of...
And as we're nearly there, really, grilled you enough, I think maybe even the last thing would be around takeaways. If you did have any takeaways and been involved in this process, what would they be?
I think a reflection.
Yeah, reflection or take, or
yeah.
something that you think you've learned from it, maybe.
Yeah, I think what I've learned in preparing for this is that I don't reflect enough. But I ask other people to reflect a lot.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that's one of the things. The whole thing is about reflection and our relationship with young people, reflecting on them, relationship with, you know, your justice workers, as a manager, reflecting on that. It's really important.
Cool. And Mary, anything?
It's probably exactly the same. You know, I think that sort of reflective practice, taking time out, spending time, investing that time and looking at kind of what's actually important here in trying to engage a young person. So it's time well spent because, as I say, if you don't have the relationship with the young person, you're really at nothing. So, yeah.
It's a nice takeaway. Lads, thanks very much. I think it's great to hear your... It's great to hear the practice wisdom, and I suppose Mary and Linda are involved with us in a group that we have as well called a mastery group that is, I suppose, continuing to exist of people that probably were involved in the research and maybe some newcomers that will help us and provide a sounding board for us as we implement the model this year and next year. So it's great to have you involved with us. The knowledge is just brilliant, as always. Great. So if anyone has any questions, we have time for questions if people do. Anything burning, nothing at all, then we can go for a coffee or lunch. Does it make sense to people? Good, because we're going to about 60 or 70 people next week to present. So, like, the rubber's hitting the road, as they say, with practitioners, and we need to, you know, talk to them about it. So I think it helps that it's a co-designed peer process that we were involved in, you know. I think it'll be familiar to practitioners. Cool. Yeah, Aisling, there's a room mic just for the recording, I think, Aisling. We might use these again, you never know. You'll be famous. Thanks, Aisling.
Yeah, no, I just want to say thanks a million for the presentations, and to Linda and Mary, it's great to hear you speak on it as well. I think definitely from what you can see from today, I think relationship is definitely a strong foundation for promoting change with young people. And one of the components of the model that really stuck out to myself was flexible. And Mary, you gave a good example during COVID when the phone and online wasn't working, that you went out and walked in the community and made yourselves visible, which I think is a really flexible approach with young people. And Linda, you would have mentioned, like, you always saw relationships as important, but maybe other agencies didn't really see it. So I guess I'm just wondering, I think with some services or agencies, maybe outside of the youth justice area, they can be quite restrictive in their approach with young people. And I just wonder, is there an opportunity going forward maybe to roll this out with other agencies or services, or even to make them aware of this relationship model to present it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll go first, Jack, if you want to come in, that's fine. Yeah, so it's in one of our recommendations in the report. Like, ideally, this is something that can work across the spectrum of, you know, human services. And even when if you looked at the evidence review, you will see that a lot of the knowledge that we were trying to get was coming from counselling, psychotherapy, other services where relationships are really, really important, and trying to maybe make it fit in with youth justice, because there wasn't much research done on relationships for youth diversion purposes. You know, that was quite novel. So again, it would be ideal if we can, when we have the time, to try and talk to other people about this, and as much as possible we'll do that. Like, and other agencies, I think, could definitely learn from the model. And who's to say that a version of this model can't be used in a different setting? So it's a good question. Yeah. Jackie.
I think sort of one of the benefits, we'd say the youth justice sector, we have a very informal setting. So when young people come in, I think that's kind of, they've just this informal, safe space. It's not kind of like that authority, you know, where they're going into school and there's certain limits and restrictions. And a lot of the young people we would work with would find themselves sometimes, you know, on the outside of that. You know, they're expelled from school, or they're suspended from school, or they're barred from the shop, or they can't go to the shopping centre. So they're constantly kind of on the outside. So when they kind of find a space where the door is open, they're welcome, and that's kind of what that setting is providing. But one of the things I learned from, we did training on trauma-informed care, and one of the things, just the takeaway I got from that was that, you know, you should nearly treat everybody, you know, when you meet them with that hat on you. And if every organisation had that approach, that would just make a huge difference to kind of how people engage and how young people engage in services. So if it was rolled out, I think
loads of useful messages, and I suppose even, I don't want to steal your thunder on this one, Jackie, but like, we're engaging with groups in the UK. I'm going to Sweden presenting on this in a few weeks. There's things that we are doing to try and get this out, so you never know would be my answer. And we've got sorry, Linda, do you want to go there?
Yeah, no, I just want to say, I suppose one of the things I think as well that would be useful to happen is in our engagement with other agencies. Like, I know, like, if we go to case conferences or MEHLs, we write a report and we contextualise the case, I suppose, in the context of the YLS framework and the needs and risks. So I think it would be really useful as well to kind of include the relationship evidence in that this is our approach and it's based on this evidence, you know, that we're explaining to other agencies, or we're telling other agencies that this is there, this exists now, rather than, you know, they're not knowing kind of thing. Yeah, using that.
Brilliant. Helen,
Yeah, I was just going to agree with what you were saying earlier about the transferability of this to other sectors. I worked for many years in the community development sector, and for years people have been kind of fighting against the requirements from the funder to report on a certain type of activity. You know, what was considered important was what they could count, and, you know, and very kind of the longer term hard outputs more than outcomes. Or the community development workers were talking about the type of things that I was seeing there in the soft outcomes, and that relationship building was key. So we were always trying to say, you know, a lot of the same thing that the youth justice workers are saying, that a lot of our time is invested in building the relationship with members of the community. So I definitely think this is something that the key learning from this could be shared with other government departments working, as I said, Owen, in other human and social service sectors.
sounds great. We'll have to get our director onto that. Assistant director. Yeah. Alphonse, sorry,
It's actually wonderful, the presentation and actually the process that has gone through and the efforts to bring it up to this level, you know, research, designing, and now implementation.
Thanks, Alphonse. It's great.
But it's still a research.
Yeah.
So how are you going to go about this? Because it's I'm imagining myself having worked a few decades ago with young people. And I'm imagining myself being in the organization, and here is this partnership upon which I'm going to implement relationship, knowing very well that the outcome for young people and even for organization is pretty good. But there is an aspect of this implementation which is a research. You know, so how to work with this implementation or intervention which has got a dual character. What are the kind of challenges that you're expecting, and maybe how are you going to deal with them, or how do you plan to deal with them?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question, Alphonse, because you're right, we're disseminating across 106, but we're continuing to look at implementation as part of that process, and the continuous development of the guide itself and of the relationship work. We've had some thoughts. We've talked a lot about what that will look like. We've kind of looked towards the implementation science world a lot in terms of trying to inform some of that, and also the kind of policy domain and what's happened already. And we've also been speaking to the practitioners through the mastery group to get their insights around how they think this might pan out and what it would look like. So we've shared some ideas around how we're going to continue to gather some data as part of this process. We've shared it with practitioners in the mastery group, and we're going to share it with practitioners at the dissemination events over the coming months as well, to get their initial kind of surface level thoughts around that, and then develop a proposal based on that, and possibly try out elements of that proposal to see how it lands with people and how people find it, and is it effective as well in terms of getting the right data for the policymaker, but also, you know, for the practitioners themselves, that it's not a cumbersome exercise. So we want to make sure that we keep the ask very low. So there's definitely an element of support and research happening in tandem with each other, and there's a lot of literature now around kind of implementation support, competencies, teamwork, that kind of thing, Alphonse, that I think we'll need to look to and see what works locally for people here in the context of the projects. But Yeah, it's a really interesting question because it's one we're working hard to kind of figure out at the moment with the people on the ground, because I think that's really, really important. So,
And
thanks,
luckily
Alphonse.
for us, we have someone that's doing a PhD in implementation of this, if not. So we're lucky in that sense. I think support is really, really important, Alphonse, as well. I think it was mentioned there. And when you look at the implementation science stuff, you see that it's around coaching, mentoring, providing that level of support that's slightly different. It's not monitoring, like it's something different. It's holding hands while you go through it. And I think we're set up to do that because we've done an initial implementation study with the students over a number of years when this was being tried out in the first place. So we have a number of facilitators and barriers that we know that could potentially help us or hinder us in the process. So I think we've got some background evidence already, but as Jackie says, we'll continue to build that as we go with this. And I think support, if we figure out how to do it well, will be really important. I think that's it, lads. Thank you so much. There's enough time for tea and coffee outside. We're a bit early. It's always good to finish early. So thank you very much. It's great to have you. And thanks to our panel members here. And thanks to Jackie. Cheers. Thanks.